Hi, everyone. Welcome to the third episode of the Writers and Wonders podcast. I'm Yerim, or Yerim, which is the Korean or actually Norwegian pronunciation, conveniently for me. And I'm here with Petra.
Hi, everyone.
Today we are wondering a bit about the querying process. Petra, I know that you finished editing your manuscript last week and you had talked about kind of getting into starting that process again. So I
Yeah.
wondered how that was going and if there's anything you started this week regarding the querying.
Yes. So last week I was basically rewriting my whole query package because, as mentioned before, I did this before, maybe around 2 years ago, and I had to start again, basically completely from scratch because I reread my original query letter and my synopsis as well, and I don't know what I was thinking. Actually, it's very strange how confident I was back then, thinking
Yeah.
that this query letter is fine and the synopsis is fine. And now knowing all the things that I know about both documents, I don't know what I was thinking. So now new query letter, new synopsis.
But Petra, I mean, I think that you and I are probably like many people because I think I did the same thing because there's this excitement of like, oh, I finished my manuscript. I wrote a book. Like now, I'm going to send it out to people because of course that's the goal. But I think I did the same thing. Like probably one of the first query letters that I wrote was like to like somebody very famous, someone who has had a lot of success building, debuting new authors. And I don't know why I thought, okay, let's just go for the very top with your like first query letter. When I don't know about you, but when I had done it last time, I felt like every time I reached out to a new agent and made revisions and this is maybe also another question to talk about later, like how much you personalize each query
Mhm.
for a different agent. But I felt like it was getting better every time I reached out to someone new. And I was like,
Mm.
why did I contact like my like sort of like my favorite one or the one I really wanted to meet for the very first letter? But I mean, so I think that there's like a natural desire to want to do that. And part of that comes from the excitement of finishing your manuscript.
Yes, and
So,
now looking back at that time, I think I was too excited, which is why I made some of those mistakes. And for example, now I'm not making the mistake of querying one of my favorite agents right in the first round because of what you said, that I'm expecting that I might do some tweaks and little adjustments of maybe both the query letter and the synopsis, in case I receive any feedback from those first people that I reach out to. And so I don't want to lose my chance with some of those agents that I really, really, really want to work with. Not that I'm querying, people that I just I don't want to work with, because everyone on my list is a person who I would be glad to work with. But I think all writers have their favorites anyway. So
yeah, I mean, this sounds very strategic.
Mhm.
So how do you think the process differs from last time? And also, I mean, you already mentioned kind of a bit of a strategy, like your first round. So that makes me think there will be another round. And maybe you can talk a little bit about how you're thinking you're going to move forward now with the querying
Yeah.
process.
So one of the main differences now is that last time I had a list of maybe 100 agents, and I was continuously working through the list, not even stopping for a break in case some of those people would give me any feedback. So I was just going. And apart from maybe a bit of those, a bit of that personalization that you mentioned. I was just sending out nearly the same query letter and synopsis every time. Now I'm thinking I'm going to do this in batches. So I'm going to reach out to maybe 5 or 10 agents in one round, which will probably take me a week because we also have a life. So or like other parts of our lives. So it's not that I can do this all day and night. And so I'm hoping that from that initial round of agents, I will receive some feedback that might be helpful. Even if they say no, maybe they will mention that, I don't know, something helpful that will tell me that, okay, maybe I will have to edit the query letter here and there, or maybe I don't know, rewrite the pitch part, make it stronger somehow. I don't know, we'll see. But anyway, if I will get some feedback, then that will allow me to make my query package stronger and then keep reaching out to new agents.
Okay, I have a couple of questions
Okay.
on your points there. So my first question is, the last time you queried, did you get any feedback from anyone that you reached out to? And if so, kind of what was the extent of it? And then secondly, after you do this first batch of querying, how much do you intend to wait before you do the next round? Because I mean, we all know
Mm-hmm.
it feels like the standard is to almost get no response
Yeah.
from agents. You just
Yeah.
send your manuscript, intro and everything out into the
Into the void.
digital space and wonder where it's floating and that sort of thing. So how much time do you think you'll give before you go into that next round?
Okay, so I don't have an exact date or number of days or a timeline regarding this yet. What I can estimate is based on what I see on Query Tracker, because now I'm using the paid plan, so I have a subscription, and now I can see the average number of days an agent sends either a positive or a negative reply to a submission. And so I can see that maybe this agent that I'm reaching out to in this first round, on average, gets back to you with even a negative reply in 6 days, let's say. It's still an average. So,
That's really swift.
yeah, but there are those numbers there. So this is why also in this first round, I'm reaching out to agents who have this short average turnaround time,
Mhm.
because this is how I can get feedback quickly if they are willing to give me any, which brings us to the other part of the question, or this other question that you had is, about responses in general. And the last time I did querying, obviously they were all, well, not all of them were rejections, because this is what every writer has to learn, is that sometimes you don't get a reply at all. And sometimes the agency or the agent states that, let's say, if you don't hear from us in 12 weeks or maybe in 3 months or whatever, then take it as a no. Other times they don't state that on their website and you're just left with a nothing. So, but then eventually you take that as a no as well, of course. As I said, I reached out to around 100 agents, and I think I had maybe 2 or 3 rejections that were helpful,
Mhm.
because, and luckily they all pointed to the same direction, telling me that the premise of the story is very good or intriguing, but the writing itself was something that I was missing something there, and they couldn't quite relate to it, which then told me that my book idea itself is good, but I have to improve my writing.
Mhm.
And I still think that this is the better scenario, because if you turn that around and they say the idea is just not working, it's not worth pursuing, then I would need to find a completely new book idea. But luckily it was the other way around. So I just had to improve my writing, which then led
Yeah.
me on a journey of more than a year of very significant rewrites and editing and learning a lot about editing and plot structure and everything that we discussed before.
Yeah, I think, I mean, the way I did querying in my first experience or with my first manuscript that I took a pause on was kind of similar to what you're doing now. I think I reached out to maybe like 10-ish and maybe some before. That was like when I first finished and I was like super excited and I was like, yay, like now someone will want my book. But then, you get these like rejections. And let's talk about like, this is a vulnerable process because you're doing it alone and you're sending out like something you've worked on for a really long time. And like you said, you either get no response or like, I think I've gotten some polite rejections, which are just like, oh, I don't think I'm the right fit. And you're like, well, this is probably a standard email anyway. But my favorite was like, I had this one and it had in the heading like intern number one or something like that. And it was like, obviously, the interns are the summer interns, or I don't know, whatever interns are the ones gatekeeping and just like reading some of the queries. Or maybe they're just receiving the sort of the no's from the agents and they have to be the ones to reply. But it was like, oh, great. Like there's this kid in university who hasn't even finished school. And he or she is like not even signing, anyone's name. It's like, oh, sorry, like it's not the right fit. Intern number one, So just wanted to like add that, like, what we're sharing is like we're putting it out there. It's not an easy process. So it's very nice to hear kind of how you're going about it. And so maybe people who are listening or even just between the two of us, like to
Mhm.
kind of get a check for like, how are other people doing this? Or am I doing it the same way, the right way, the wrong way? How can we draw on each other's experiences? So you mentioned now you are subscribing to Query Tracker, which
Yes.
I guess it sounds like you didn't do last time.
Yeah,
But
exactly.
are there then some maybe other resources that you've found useful and helpful when it comes to having more information about going through also finding the agents that you want to contact? I don't know if you want to talk a little about what you've been looking for this time
Oh,
around, maybe differently as well.
yes. Let's talk about finding agents first, because probably that's the first thing that you have to go through anyway. So I think one of the resources or sites that you can look at is obviously Query Tracker, or sorry, that maybe that's Query Manager at that point. I don't know. It's like they're kind of built in together.
Yeah.
But anyway, you can do your research there, because I would say most of the agents use it, not all of them for sure. But you will also find agents who are listed on Query Tracker, but they are not accepting a query on the platform, rather an online form that they
Mhm.
have on the agency website. So there are all kinds of versions and mixtures here that you have to navigate. But
Yeah.
regarding finding agents, you can look there. And then there's also the site Manuscript Wishlist,
Hmm.
which is very helpful. And you will find agent profiles there. And of course, their wish lists. And I think now it's also worth looking at Instagram, because many agents are there and sharing their wish lists as well. You can use the hashtag MSWL for the same purpose. Maybe you can play around with the hashtag lit agent, because that might lead you to an agent as well. And I think also just plain old Google search could serve you well.
Yeah. I mean, also, I think, of course, there are some of these major, very large agencies and even going into their websites, because sometimes I've seen that maybe their profiles on their own websites are updated first. Sometimes it's the opposite. They update first on like Query Tracker, but there is also like maybe sometimes a little more information available about in their bio or the other authors that they represent through their agency.
Yes, true. Also, some writers have, maybe they have more information on the publishing industry as it is when they're going into querying. And so they know specific literary agencies, which is a different approach from where I was coming from, actually, where I was like, okay, just let me find agents that would be suitable or fitting for my book and for me. But I know writers who just Google literary agency or literary agencies, and sometimes, that you can be more specific, like agencies in the UK or in the US or Canada or whatever you want. And then you'll also have a list of options. Yeah, so I think the point is, or the goal is to look in as many places as possible, and then make a list of potential agents you will reach out to. And this is where I think we should discuss the fact how you choose an agent that you want to reach out to, because that can be tricky as well.
I love also, when you read a book and in the acknowledgments, I
True.
love to see like where in the acknowledgments, are the authors mentioning their agents and how are they mentioning them?
Yes.
So then
Yes.
sometimes that's also a way like, I think this author really loves their agent. Like they look like
Yeah.
they have a really personal, relationship, which I
Yeah.
think
Yeah.
is what you would want with your agent. So, um, how do you find, your sort of acknowledgments page, personal relationship agent, right?
Yes. Also, even just the fact that they are mentioning their agent can be helpful for you because, for example, one of the agents that are, I guess we can call her one of my dream agents at the moment. I found her name in the acknowledgement section of a book because one of my comp titles belongs to this author, and her agent is this person that I'm also going to reach out to, hoping that, my book has a similar vibe and other similarities, and maybe she's going to be open to that. So yes, that's a very good addition to look at the acknowledgement sections of books and see if the authors mention their agents. Yes.
Yeah. So what else have you been looking for as you've done your research? And also, I guess, how many of your previous list are you kind of contacting or maybe
Mm-hmm.
not in terms of finding your new list of agents?
Yeah, so far the list that I put together now is they are all new agents. I don't have anyone on the list that I've reached out to before, precisely because most agents say that, it's like they won't sort of allow you to send your manuscript again. Or only after a significant rewrite. I do have one person from that previous time who told me that I wasn't a good fit, but she tells every writer that she's very much open to seeing your book again or your story again once you made significant edits. So I might reach out to her, but otherwise I have completely new agents on my list. As I was doing my research, I did stumble upon names that I had to double check because I found them fitting, but then I realized I reached out to her 2 years ago, and it is now a different book, as we discussed. So maybe I can try again. But so far, I was thinking that I'm trying new agents. And for me, and I think this is also part of the process where you're figuring out which agents would be fitting for querying, is the genre pick somewhere in that decision, because for some people it's going to be very easy, but my case is different because my book is what I call it, actually, or I put it in that category or genre group. I call it upmarket women's fiction and magical realism. So it took a lot of time for me to figure which agents to reach out to based on those terms, because, just to put it simply, there are many agents looking for women's fiction, but they are not into magical realism, or don't even, get started on what upmarket means, because then we will be here for the rest of the year. So maybe we can discuss that later on, but that's
Yeah.
also a point that you have to consider. And when it comes to magical realism, that's sort of problematic on its own because some people, including agents, consider it to belong more to fantasy. Others consider it to be part of more of literary fiction. And so anyway, the idea that I came up with was that I would say my restrictive element is magical realism. So I can just reach out to a person who represents women's fiction and has never mentioned in their wish list that they like magical elements
Mhm.
because they will probably reject me. So I
Mm.
need people who either mention specifically that they like magical realism or that they like magical elements somewhere in the story.
Mhm.
Or even if they don't mention these two things in these two versions, I can see that they represent both women's fiction and fantasy, because
Mhm.
that tells me that somewhere along those lines, I might be able to fit in.
Mhm.
So that is something to consider. Other writers might not have these problems because it's very clear regarding their manuscript if that's, I don't know, fantasy or horror or whatever that you have. So this is what I had to consider regarding
Yeah.
picking the agents.
No, certainly, of course, there's a lot of, like you mentioned, sort of overlapping within genres because, women's fiction, like, I don't know if you remember, like, there was a time when, and I'm not equating the two as the same, but there was a time when there was a lot of, like, the chick lit.
Yes.
And then at some point, like, chicklet was, like, not I don't know if it was, like, not a good term or it was,
Yeah.
like, it didn't sound nice. I mean, I have, like, my chicklet era. I really enjoyed a lot of the books from then. But, yeah, now, you also have, of course, women's fiction. You have book club fiction. A
Mm.
lot of this overlaps with, like, historical elements, but maybe it's not quite historical fiction. So you're right. I think we can probably have at least one episode just talking about different genres and, how to understand them and how to identify your book with them. And then, of course, relating them to comps that kind of fit on the
Yeah.
bookshelf together, as they say. We've talked about how you're finding your agents, but then how much are you personalizing each query for the different agents?
Hmm.
So, for example, you don't always have to. I mean, we already alluded to this. Like some of them you can go through the query tracker or query manager platform. Some of them want you to submit in just an email, no attachments. Some of them you do like a 5-page writing sample, 10-page, I don't know, like, and then also, of course, you have different agents who are, like you said, like they might fit really on target with your genre, or you might be kind of peddling the two. So, because also it takes a lot of time to personalize queries. Like, how much and to what extent are you doing that?
Okay, so there's, I think, two aspects of personalization here in a way. One is where you have to check and keep in mind that the way you submit your query package and the manuscript is going to differ from agent to agent and agency to agency. For example, yesterday I sent out my first query and there,
Woohoo!
yeah,
Let's take a moment. Yay!
thanks. And there, I had to use the agency's website form and
Hmm.
had to attach a document, a Word document specifically, as they requested. And I had to paste both the synopsis and the first 3 chapters in the same document. But then there was a separate part of the form where I just simply had to paste in my query letter.
Oh, yeah.
You will find that this can vary from agent to agent and agency to agency because sometimes they ask for pasting everything in your email, as like the body text.
Hmm.
And they will specifically tell you to never attach anything because if you do, I don't know, you're fired kind of, or they won't even look at your email because
Right.
you can obviously see if there's an attachment or not, and it's going to be going down the drain. Um, And other times you can, or they ask you to send an attachment, but maybe you have to attach each document separately. Sometimes everything goes in the same document. So this is something that you have to pay attention to regarding sort of a bit of personalization here, the technical side of it, I guess. And the other part is personalizing your query letter. And I have to say that last time I was really into that, personalizing each letter as
Mhm.
much as I could. For me, most of this meant just referring back to what the agent mentioned on their wish list, maybe highlighting a specific genre or an element that they are looking for in stories. And now I'm not really doing that, or I'm not planning on doing that anymore,
Mhm.
because I've seen this in many posts from writers and agented writers as well, who are now, on the road to getting published. Hopefully, that personalization doesn't matter as much as you might think.
Mhm.
It can be nice, and also if it makes true sense, because I've also seen agents mentioning that you don't have to do that if it doesn't really add value. Maybe if you can, I think maybe I'm planning to do that with a few agents, only if I know that maybe I really like the book of their client,
Mhm.
and that is something that is very specific and
Mhm.
tells the agent that I know the market and I know their client base or circles. But last time I was just simply saying that since you're seeking, I don't know, women's fiction with magical elements, I'm submitting XYZ novel to you, or my novel to you, blah, blah, blah. So I don't know, it wasn't that very crucially important, but was
Mhm.
adding to the word count, which is also something that you have to keep in mind, that the
Yeah.
query letter cannot be very long, which is something we can discuss in another episode. So to put it shortly, I'm not planning on doing personalization very heavily
Mhm.
at all, for these reasons that I'm seeing agents and writers both mentioning that maybe it's not that important. There are way more important elements of your query that you have to keep in mind and put your
Mhm.
energy into.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah, it's a lot to sort of think about, but I think, we've talked a lot about this again. It is a vulnerable process. You are sending a lot of your work and energy to a stranger or sending it out like into the online world, especially the ones where you submit in on like an actual site. Yeah, I remember once there was an agent who it was similar. Their agency wanted you to put the query letter and I think it was the first 3 chapters or something directly into their portal. And when you copied and pasted, all of the spacing, like the paragraphing broke so that it was just like one big block of text.
Yeah.
There was spacing, but no like, double lines or anything like that. And I was just like, my gosh, like, is this like, do you have to take the time to produce paragraph breaks? Like, is it worth it? Like, why are they still doing it like this? Do they know like that their system is not working in a very efficient way?
Yeah,
So
yeah,
yeah,
that's
I
a
think,
horrible experience. Horrible. Like after you spend that much time and
yeah,
energy into formatting as well, and then it all falls apart, and then
yeah,
you're anxious anyway about querying, and then there's this added I don't know what, and you have to make the decision whether you
yeah,
deal
you
with
might
it
as
or
well
not.
use a typewriter and print out your pages and post a
Yeah.
document in the mail. Like
Yeah.
it might be even better.
No, just this reminded me of this pet peeve I have, I think we can call it that, is when you're going through agent profiles and their wish lists, and they have these very vague statements about what they're looking for, leaving you without nearly any idea of what they're actually looking for. And I say this more with big agencies and big
Mhm.
agent names, which is telling me that maybe they are not looking for these unsolicited,
Mhm.
manuscripts, but
Mhm.
because they don't have to. at
Right.
that point
Right.
in their career.
Yeah.
Nevertheless, it's very, but sometimes they are open to, those submissions. So in those cases, I'm at loss because they would be saying things like, I'm looking for character driven stories and books that I just can't put down, or I don't know
Yeah.
what kind of like mesmerizing narratives that will shock me,
Yeah.
or stories with unexpected twists. And so these
Yeah.
kind of vague things, which are,
Yeah.
you know, partly I understand because everybody likes those kind of books, right? But
Yeah.
this doesn't tell me anything about
Yeah.
whether I should query you or not, because or my other favorite is when they say that they like laugh out loud humor or dry humor
Right.
or very funny stories. And then back in the day when I was also personalizing my letters, I was thinking, how does it look if I say, since you're looking for very humorous stories, here is mine, which is like hysterical. So
Yeah.
I you cannot say that about your own story. I mean, this is the part where agents also, it's related to what agents also say, that try not to explain and attach labels to your story in the query,
Yeah.
telling them what it's like, because they will be able to decide this on their own, whether that's, for example, funny or not.
Yeah.
But anyway, I'm not in a position to do this, but I would very much like to ask those kind of agents to not do that, because honestly, we may be a good fit for each other, but I will never know, because after seeing those kind of wish lists, my decision is always, or most of the time, is to not query them, because I have no idea if I would fit that kind of, description. This is weird, very weird. So
Yeah.
please get specific and
Yeah.
help us out.
Yeah, well, this world of querying is it's pretty interesting, right? Because there are, so many agents out there and so many writers out there, and it's like helping them meet, finding your match. So it's a little bit of a dating dancing process. But in any
Yeah.
case, thanks, Petra. I think we covered a lot of interesting points. Obviously, we'll be talking about the ongoing querying process. And
Mhm.
yeah, I'm sure later at some point we will also talk about what goes into the actual query itself, in terms of the
Yeah.
letter, in terms of the synopsis, sharing your chapters. So I'm looking forward to that.
Yeah, me too.
So yeah, looking forward to the next episode as well.
Yeah.
And thanks to everyone who was listening today.
Yes, this was our episode 3 of Writers and Wonders. And hopefully by the time this goes out, we'll have a few listeners already.
Yay. All right. Okay. So talk to you next time.
Yeah.
Okay.
Bye,
Bye.
everyone.